Now, let's talk about the shy type of underachiever. When we look at an individual who's shy, what I really mean by this is a kind of introverted approach to life. Person is not the life of the party. In fact, when they go to a party, they much prefer to talk with one person or maybe two. They don't like large crowds. These kids may have one friend outside of the home. They may not have any friends outside the home. They are contained, so to speak, within a known crowd. If they grow up in the same neighborhood, they may keep the same crowd of friends, maybe one or two, all through school, and have a lot of trouble when they have to leave because it's difficult for these individuals to establish friendships. And the ones they do have, they prefer to keep for long, long periods of time. Now, the shy youngster begins to underachieve because they fear negative evaluation. As a matter of fact, the fear of being humiliated would be difficult to underestimate or overestimate that fear. So when they put themselves out to be known, such as answering questions in class, they're really afraid of making a huge mistake and being laughed at or humiliated in some way. Many times, teachers add to this child's problem by humiliating them. One teaching technique that I discovered in one school and became horrified at was when I had a shy type of underachiever and the teachers had been told by somebody that the way to handle all kids is when they don't do work or they mess up is to stand them up in class and let everyone know that they made the mistake. Well, this youngster, being the shy youngster, was so humiliated he was unable to go back to school. So your parenting techniques with this type of kid should be very gentle and should be aware that when you don't need to humiliate them, they already feel more than they need. And that's why they're not performing. See, this is the type of youngster who thinks this way. If I really try, I may do well, but I may not. So if I don't do well and I'm really trying, oh man, that's a humiliation. So I'll just not try. I'll avoid the task. I'll avoid things. And by avoiding, if I do badly, then I'm not really involved. I mean, it's an excuse, right? I forgot, or I didn't, I left the books at school, or I didn't know the teacher was going to test this. So the bad grades don't reflect the real me. And the real me is so afraid of humiliation that I back further and further away from challenge. These are the type of kids, by the way, who do really well in school when it's impossible. If they're told, look, there's no way you're going to pass this class, they'll study very hard and may surprise everybody and pass. If they're told, oh, it's so easy you can't possibly fail, then they'll also work very hard. They'll tend to work for teachers who are absolutely total approval giving. So if a teacher is one of these individuals who has unconditional positive acceptance for whatever the kid gives, this child will feel safe and will likely work. But as soon as he gets or she gets a teacher who has no nonsense, do it, I'm going to grade your performance, they'll tend to feel that as a danger and use their normal coping mechanism, which is avoidance. Now, as a parent, when you're disciplining this child, you have to go out of your way not to shame them, because that'll just make everything worse. This child has an overabundance of a sense of shame, and that's part of the problem. Normally, as a parenting pattern, one parent is kind of the partner in this youngster's shyness. This parent gives the feeling to the child, gives the perception to the child the world is really a dangerous place and it's full of horrible things. So the child gets almost phobic against growing up and moving out and doing new things. So they withdraw, and the parents are in a quandary. If they push the child too much to do things the child's afraid of, the child will simply crater and not do it. But if you don't push enough, they don't move at all. So you have to strike a balance somewhere, push them just enough that it creates some anxiety, but not an overwhelming anxiety about the fears of humiliation and negative evaluation, but not push them so far that they become overwhelmed. And that's the balance. And the nice thing about the 10-step program, it helps the child learn to identify where their own anxiety is and have plans to push themselves. And of course, we'll get to that in the next tape. Now, the final type of underachiever is probably the most disturbed of them all. We've been talking relatively a normal range child. The martyr is what's next. And the martyr is a very difficult child to work with. So I need to explain this because the more this pattern predominates in a child's life, the more difficulty a child will have in overcoming underachievement behavior. Let me give you an idea of what the martyr is like. This child sacrifices success in order to feel secure. Now, many underachievers do that. This child has a certain quality in that sacrifice, however. When they sacrifice success for security, they do it in a way that pulls down punishment. This child literally feels secure when they get punished. And that's how they live. Now, when they are successful, and sometimes they can have periods of success, their anxiety increases. They're feeling alone and abandoned and isolated. And when they feel that way, they seek out a punishment which then makes them feel secure. And often, therefore, failure leads to security feelings. Achievement leads to deep insecurity feelings, feelings of fear and anxiety, buried away and unexpressed in anything other than behavior. They don't talk about it. Now, how does this pattern develop? Now, I need to talk with you as a parent because if you've done this, I don't want you to feel bad about it, but I want you to understand how it was created so you can begin to change it. Many times, children who develop a martyr pattern were inappropriately physically punished as young children. And many times parents are very busy. They may have other children in the house. What this child learns is that, well, all children have feelings of being alone, and they seek parent attention. This martyr pattern begins when a child seeks attention through misbehavior because they're feeling insecure, and the parents physically spank or punish the child. And the child feels better, because he's got the attention. And what he learns is, if I get alone and I'm feeling isolated, if nobody's paying attention to me, I mess up, I get physically punished, but I feel better. I feel secure. I'm attached. Now, as this grows, this is what the parents see. The parents will say to me something like this: well, he's just a little monster. We try things. We tell him not to do it. We try to lecture. We try to take things away. But he just keeps getting more and more angry, more and more of a problem, and we spank him. And by George, he's a little angel. And he's just fine. But he always comes back to the misbehavior. He always evokes more punishment. Now, this is, say, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, maybe 4 or 3. Now, what happens to the martyrs when they get into school, they start being successful. And remember what we said earlier in the tapes. Success at first leads to more anxiety, leads to feeling alone. You feel different. It's not comfortable at first. Even though it feels good in some way, it also feels uncomfortable. When this child feels uncomfortable, he seeks out punishment. And this is how it works with teachers. The more you get ego involved in the child doing well, the more the child will then punish you and himself. Let me tell you how this works. A teacher takes this child on. I can save this child. This is going to be great. She pours all of her heart and soul into helping this child. And at first, it seems to be getting better. But eventually, then, the child starts failing again. But it fails in a way that the teacher starts getting angry and upset and desiring to hurt or punish the child. The teacher now feels guilty about that, and the response is to withdraw from the child. I've had teachers in parent conferences tell me, first part of the year they're trying to help the child, but by the end of the year they don't want this child in their class ever again. And the problem is, you as a parent have the exact same reaction. You'll want to help, you'll get ego involved, he seems to get better, and then bam, you get crushed, you get angry, and you punish. That's the system that we really have to change. Now, many of you are saying, well, gee, that's kind of the pattern we have. Is every child a martyr? No, all kids will get punished from time to time. We're going to get away from those punishment techniques, but the martyr is a very specific pattern. And what you have to do as a parent in this pattern is maintain a steady emotional availability to your child without any demand that he get better, not getting ego involved in his or her success, but remaining available and patient, because this is the pattern that's the most trying and takes the longest to change. It's the pattern that doctors, physicians run into when a patient has lung cancer, has a lung removed, and they continue to smoke. They defeat the systems that help them get better. Now that I've ended the types on that optimistic note, let me tell you that some of you will say, okay, I see that in my child. Let me tell you something. Almost all underachiever I've ever worked with is at least mildly depressed because they're living a self-defeating life, and that'll depress anybody if they're halfway normal. Anytime a person is depressed, you'll tend to see a little bit martyr pattern. As the depression lifts, it goes away. With a martyr, however, it stays. And that's one of the ways that we kind of understand what we're dealing with. If you haven't engaged in a lot of physical punishment with the child at an early age, they're probably not going to have the martyr pattern. But now, let's go on with how you, as a parent, need to be in order to help your children grow into healthy, vital, productive kids who enjoy life and find it meaningful and, by the way, help us when we're old and can't work. Well, now we're going to start the training aspect of the tapes. Now, I know that you don't know much about the techniques at the moment. Even if you've read the book, you may need a lot more information. One of the things that I have found over the years in working with parents is that when we're trying to change children, and I'm a parent myself, the parents need to change first. Only when we change what we're doing do our children begin to change as well. And there's some reasons for that. As parents, we have innate ways that we respond to our kids, things that we think are great. Maybe we're going to do things differently than our parents did, by golly. Then we discover that we have this set sort of pattern. And what I've found, even with myself, is that the way we respond to our kids when they're having chronic problems somehow helps feed the problem. For example, a perfectionistic, controlling parent will get into all these stubborn control battles with their hidden perfectionistic underachiever, and they'll drive each other crazy forever until the parent begins to understand how he or she, how you are feeding the very problem you're trying to change. Then you're just going to keep creating the same conditions. So right now I want to talk about you and I as parents and what we have to bring to the table that we may know down deep inside at some level, but we don't always do. Now, the first thing that we need to do is become good models for our kids. I mean, what are the underachievers' problems? Failure to live out their deepest values, failure to make value-based decisions for the future, failure to follow through, failure to take responsibility, and all the excuses they make that get them off the hook for being responsible. Now, that's one of the major things that need to change. In my experience, we as parents make excuses for ourselves that mean we don't have to work hard anymore. And one of the big excuses I found, well, it changes perhaps with parents, but one of the big ones I found, especially for you fathers out there, is to look at your children and go, well, they're kind of like me when I was growing up, so look at me now, I'm doing fine. And maybe some mothers have that, but it tends to be, in my experience, a father excuse. Now, if you think about it for a moment, what makes an excuse an excuse? An excuse is something that says, I no longer have to put out effort to help, or to help my kids change. And that's what that does. What it's saying is, well, my son's like me. And we know, unfortunately, even you probably know that's not really true. They're different genetically, and they're also different in life experience. And by the way, you and I never had ourselves as fathers, did we? And the same for you mothers. Your daughters or your sons never had yourself for a parent. So what you bring to the table is going to be different than what your parents brought to the table. So it's literally not true. But if you believe it, then you'll tend to overlook some very important kinds of behavior within yourself that's feeding the problem. So let's be good models and take absolute total responsibility for training our children to be productive, happy citizens, to be able to live a complex life and to live it fully, to be real persons and to grow. Now that doesn't mean, by the way, that we take responsibility for the children's grades or for our child's behavior, but it's up to us to rear them, isn't it? That's where our responsibility really needs to be. There's a dividing line between. It's very important to understand that it's not the school's responsibility for the child to be motivated. It's not the teacher's responsibility to motivate the child. It's not you as a parent. It's not your responsibility to motivate your child to be successful. It is your child's responsibility to motivate him or herself to take charge and live a full life. Now it's our responsibility to set up conditions that train them. And if we accept that responsibility, then we're doing well. I have a philosophy that says God gave us these kids so we would have a significant problem to solve in life and our lives could be meaningful. So if you have an underachieving child and it's a chronic problem, or you wouldn't be having these tapes, I guess, then it's up to you to help solve the problem. Now, when we give up our excuses as parents, that means we've decided to work. We need to begin noticing the patterns of our behavior. For example, when we get mad, when we start trying to punish, and we need to understand that our children pull certain behavior from us because they are secretly motivated to do so, because it keeps us responding the exact same way, and that makes them secure. That's part of the underachievement package. Remember, we're going to get them to the point where the child is pushed against the wall, but we're not really going to push them. We're going to help reveal to the child that his back is against the wall already. The next thing we're going to help a child understand is that it's his decisions that push him against the wall. Now, underachievement is a series of decisions that kids make to mess themselves up. Not only today, but they are actually training themselves to mess themselves up in the future. From about 5th grade on, we're going through a new birth. We're going from childhood to adulthood. And during this stage, quite often, a child's destiny is set by their series of decisions they make on a daily basis that arrange failure for themselves. Now, kids live in a kind of denial. And what they're saying is there's no connection between today and tomorrow. And part of that denial is that they don't make decisions. Now, you cannot lecture to a child, it's your responsibility, you should have done it. That's not going to work. A child may theoretically understand that he made decisions to fail, but he doesn't understand that in the detail necessary to grasp it at the moment he's making a decision, because they do not see they make those decisions. So as a parent, what you need, is patience, which is a virtue, one of the cardinal virtues, by the way, is a virtue most parents don't have, because when we see our children going down the tubes, we want to do something now. And we want it to change quickly. And the age of instant coffee and instant change and quick techniques that promise millions aren't going to work for your children. Anytime you're dealing with a chronic problem that's been going on for a year, 2, or 3, it took a long time to build it, We're going to have to take it apart piece by piece. You're going to help, but your child's going to have to be recruited into doing that too. And sometimes that's uncomfortable. And the first thing we have to do as parents is learn to contain our discomfort, our anxiety, our fears for our children, and even our anger at their recalcitrance and their stubbornness and the stubbornness of the problem. We have to understand that literally Rome wasn't built in a day, and our children are not going to change quickly. So you have to decide, the same way I did with my kids, we all do, that rearing children is a long-term process, and we are not building something for the short run. We're building character for the long run so that our children will be good, considerate, functioning adults in charge as much as possible of their own destiny. In essence, we're trying to change the destiny of our children by helping them understand how they make decisions to fail. Now, there's a kind of attitude built in there. I've discussed two of them. One is absolute total responsibility for ourselves. If you're angry, your child did not make you angry, you're the one who's angry. We want him to deal with his boredom and not blame it on the teachers or the school. So we're not going to blame our feelings of anger at our children or our impatience on our children. We're going to take charge of it. You're going to take charge of yours. That's not always easy. If you need help, then do what I do or anybody else does. We ask friends, we ask our spouses, or maybe go to a counselor for a few sessions to get our head straight about who has what behavior, who is responsible for what. Now, there is some things, however, that I can teach you that is going to be tremendously helpful. The 10-step program is based upon a certain ability of all parents to engage the youngster in a certain way. I call this certain way a kind of positive parenting. Let me give you an example of what I mean by positive parenting. I want you to be a totally positive parent. I want you to be able to look at your child and see something underneath the behavior. I don't want you to see anger, procrastination, recalcitrance, stubbornness, controlling, conning, or avoidance behavior. I don't want you to see the surface. I want you to see underneath. I want you to remember what it was like when your child was born. You held that child in your arms and you looked at yourself, maybe in the doctor's eyes or in your child's eyes. You see your child, you're holding your child shortly after birth. You're not saying to yourself, oh, good, I'm going to make this child my underachiever. I want to see this child to become a failure. You had all these hopes and dreams and aspirations deep down inside for how this child was going to become. And if they haven't turned out exactly right, basically it's not your fault. Children are born with temperament. They have life experiences. They have a big brain. They make their own decisions. And I want you to connect with that part of your relationship with your child. It took a long time to grow here, and you're going to take a long time to help change. But I want you to feel, do you want to have a relationship with your child that's filled with distress and anger and consternation? Or do you want a relationship that's based on love, commitment, pleasure, and joy? If you want the latter, the pleasure, the joy, and the love, then that's what you give your child even when they're acting up, especially when it comes to underachievement issues, because children use your negative emotions to stay the way they are. So a totally positive parent is hard to achieve, I understand, but when you can respond with compassion and understanding when they're giving you grief, then you're doing your job. And whatever it takes to get there, get there.